and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start with some good news for a change.
That's true.
In Wisconsin, we had a big win in federal court for transgender student Ash Whitaker.
And it's not just a win for Ash.
Of
this
course.
is going to have huge implications across the country. We'll explain all that to you.
Yes.
But meanwhile, the Trump administration is still trying to gut federal offices that are responsible for civil rights enforcement.
Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos
What a piece of work.
says that protecting LGBT students is an issue that is best left to the states.
Or the courts.
But a federal report documents how LGB students are being subjected to bullying disproportionately.
Surprise.
Not big news, but they're still at least documenting that.
Well,
that's the news.
Potential big news. We don't know yet, but in Texas, anti-LGBT legislation is stalled as we record this. So the bigoted Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, is trying to force a special session of the legislature.
He is very wicked, but we are making progress in Nevada, Louisiana, and Rhode Island.
A step backward in Miami. We can't blame Miami, but the organizers of the World OutGames have canceled most of the event at the last minute. There are charges of fraud.
The new French President Macron has taken on Putin over Chechnya and more.
And the dramatic film about Act Up Paris, which we mentioned to you last week, has gone on to win the Grand Prix, that's second prize, at the Cannes Film Festival.
Why did you have to say that? I mean, they won the Grand Prix.
Yeah, because we don't want to deceive our audience. Yeah. It's a very big deal to win the Grand Prix.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
But mostly it's a big deal to win this court case that Ash Whitaker won in Wisconsin this week.
This is a young student in high school in Wisconsin, and we have a picture of him and his mom there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ash on the right, mom on the left. Ash is a 17-year-old trans man, trans boy. What do we say at 17?
Well, young man.
Thank you. Who was going to school.
Depends on what the age of consent is.
Going to school in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and transitioned as he was in school. So he was getting along fine with his classmates.
No problems.
Using the boys' bathroom all during his junior and senior years. And then a teacher noticed him going into the boys' bathroom and said, "Whoa, we can't have this," and turned him in to the administration as doing something wrong.
They threatened him with disciplinary action and have subjected him to constant surveillance because you can't be too careful about these things. So to avoid punishment, he tried to avoid using the bathroom at the school altogether.
Which made him ill.
Depression, anxiety, physical and educational harms.
A parent also went after him. None of the students had any problem with it, but between the teacher and the parent and the reaction of the administration, the school district ended up adopting a policy that forbade him to use the boys' room and told him he had to either use the girls' room or a gender-neutral single-stall bathroom just for him that was, of course, half an hour away across the campus. Have they not seen the movie Hidden Figures? So then he went to court, and in the lower court, he got an injunction against the enforcement of that policy, so he could keep using the boys' room. So, of course, the right wing came into the case and went to the federal court and said, this cannot stand. We must get rid of this injunction. The school must be able to enforce this policy.
We will lose the protection of God if we don't stop this.
This is dangerous for the other students to have Ash be able to use the boys' room. So now we have the decision from the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Which is Wisconsin, Illinois, and Indiana.
A 3-judge panel, all women,
all right,
who decided unanimously.
What party were they from?
I don't know.
Okay, because sometimes we get good rulings from Republican judges,
Absolutely. But a unanimous 3-judge panel said the injunction stays. Ash can use the boys' room for the rest of his senior year. And here's the deal. The harm visited on Ash is real.
Yeah.
The harm supposedly about to be visited on everybody else if he uses the boys' room is completely speculative and highly unlikely.
Non-existent, in fact. And what the court did is it affirmed the guidance from the Obama administration, which was rescinded on transgender students in schools.
Well, they didn't rely on that.
Well, it said it affirms it.
It affirms the basic tenet of it, but they did not rely on that particular guidance. What they relied on was Title IX of the Education Act and equal protection.
But as the Obama administration did, it is an affront, or not an affront, but it is a reversal of what the DOJ and the Department of Justice and the Department of Education did on this.
Well, what they said was that to forbid him to use the boys' room as a trans male is sex discrimination. And what the fundamental notion of this ruling is that the court accepted him as male, and the school does not.
Yes.
And that is a revolutionary idea for the court to say. And what they said is, if you accept him as male, as we do, you absolutely cannot forbid him to use the boys' room. He is male. You are keeping a male out of the boys' room, and that cannot stand and is discrimination.
So Ash is thrilled with the decision after he said after facing daily humiliation at school from being threatened with discipline, constantly monitored, the district courts allowed me to be a typical senior in high school and to focus on my classes, after school activities, applying to college, and building lasting friendships. Looks forward to college next year, and he hopes that his case will help other transgender students in Kenosha and across the country.
Well, and it will, because what this does is, as they say, obviate the need for the Obama administration guidelines that were rescinded by the Trump administration, mostly by Attorney General Jeff Sessions, but with the ultimate collusion of Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. We don't, if this ruling stands and is expanded across the country and accepted by the Supreme Court, where it's likely to end up in dispute, then we don't need those guidelines, because this is the fundamental interpretation.
If that's what we're depending on, we better get there fast, because we got a lot of 80-year-olds on the court.
Well, this could have been the Gavin Grimm case, but because it was the same issues and the same arguments, but because the guidelines were withdrawn.
But why didn't the Supreme Court rule on the
because they didn't want to deal with it. Because the lower court in the lower court in Gavin Grimm had decided on the basis of the Trump guidelines. The Trump guidelines were withdrawn, so the Supreme Court sent it back down to the lower courts.
May I approach the bench? We need a little colloquy here. Did the Supreme Court send it back and say you have to look at this again for Gavin Grimm?
Yes,
so that's still going on.
It is ostensibly still going on, although Gavin Grimm is graduating, so they may not pursue that. They may, but the right wing is going to one would think, appeal this Ash Whitaker decision.
The right wing is so relentless, I wasn't going to talk about it on the show this week, but they're suing to get some rocks from the bottom of the Grand Canyon to prove that the world was created 9,000 years ago in 6 days. I mean, they're suing in court, the same group that is opposing these transgender students.
Yes, they are. And you know what the court has said to them, or the Park Service? We're not granting you the right to examine these rocks until you give us absolute coordinates for each rock that you want to examine by the stream at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
I think they should say, if you try to take any of these rocks, we will smite you.
Well, that's more or less what they are saying. At any rate, this decision in the Seventh Circuit in Wisconsin is a landmark decision, a beautiful result, and congratulations to Ash Whitaker for pursuing this, and to the Transgender Law Center, which represented him along with pro bono help from a number of law firms.
And it makes so much of a difference when your parents stand by you in these cases.
Yes.
I mean, I can remember back in some of these prom cases back 30 years ago, if a parent didn't stand by the kid who wanted to go to the prom, they wouldn't let them go forward in some cases.
And to have the fellow students stand by him, too. The fact that this came from a teacher and a parent and the administration and these right-wing law groups, but the students were standing by Ash, was terrific.
We are going to get into this a little bit more when we talk about a Baptist college in Alabama later in the program.
I don't believe I have that story.
Okay.
You'll be able to surprise me.
All right.
But let's, as long as we're in this education realm, let's go on to our Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos. Well, she testified to Congress about her continuing relentless push to take funding from public education and instead devote it to giving parents money to buy places at charter schools, religious schools, private schools for students who she says are not being served well by public schools.
Vouchers.
Yeah. Vouchers,
tax
charter
credits,
schools, yeah.
et cetera.
Public money to private schools.
Yeah.
So she's testifying to Congress, and one member of Congress says to her, well, what about schools that discriminate? Do you want to give public money to schools that discriminate? For instance, there's this Lighthouse Christian Academy in Indiana that will not take students who come from families with same-sex parents. Or any other gay people in their families.
Well,
are you willing to give kids vouchers to go to that school, public money to that school?
Here's the whole thing.
And she says,
No, well,
yes.
yeah, she says it's up to them.
Yeah, it's up to the
It's
state.
an outrage. It used to be when government gave money to religiously affiliated or just private institutions, any private institution, including religious institutions, that they had to serve everybody equally under the law. Now, of course, we're not protected under the law in all cases in a lot of these places, don't forget, but we don't have a federal LGBT rights law, although we have a new Republican sponsor, more about which later. But I look at the situation even in New York, where we give tons of money to these religious institutions, and believe me, a lot of them are anti-gay as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, I just think that public money should not be going to these religious institutions.
The least you should expect with your public money is that it will be used fairly and without prejudice and discrimination. Right. And Betsy DeVos sat there absolutely relentless and stone-faced to Congress and said, oh yeah, I'm fine with that. It's up to the states, far be it from us to interfere in states' rights to decide how they use their money. And if they want to give it to Christian academies that reject students from LGBT families, that's up to them.
And this is in the face of, and I'm surprised that the Department of Justice's Bureau of Justice Statistics this week and the Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics released their report on, it's called Indicators of School Crime and Safety, which included data on the fact that just LGB, not transgender, students report being bullied at a rate of 34% compared to 19% for non-gay students. In addition, 28% of LGBT students reported being cyberbullied in 2015 compared to 14% of their non-gay peers. So again, we knew all this. I'm surprised it's not even wider. But the fact that they're still releasing these kinds of things without getting shut down by Betsy DeVos or Jeff Sessions.
Well, since the Trump administration's proposed budget from Mick Mulvaney of the Office of Management and Budget proposes cuts to the Education Department's Office of Civil Rights and the Labor Department's Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs, I think we will see a diminution of those reports.
They want to cut the civil rights divisions of the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Department of Health and Human Services. And then White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer is asked about all this, and he says, human rights is something that's very strong to him, Trump. It's something that's very strong to him.
Again, they get up and say this with a straight face. And there is not enough follow-up. I know these reporters are sitting there with 10 million questions to ask. There are just so many things. And that Sean Spicer walks out of the room when the questioning gets too tough. But could they please at least get these questions on the record that bring up things like this bullying report and ask how it is that they can be cutting back these funds? The fact that Sean Spicer and Betsy DeVos and Trump himself and all these people can stand there and make these platitudinous statements of support for human rights and then at the same time do all this cutting and implement all these policies and then go abroad and say human rights don't matter to us, well, only trade matters to us.
Gay people don't matter. So let's get the picture of Gauthier Destiné of Luxembourg up. This is all the spouses at the NATO conference. In the back row on the left is Gauthier Destiné of Luxembourg, who is the husband of the Prime Minister of Luxembourg. And when they put this on the White House website, they just didn't identify him. There was nothing.
They had the names of all the women.
Who's the guy?
Although they got the name of the wife of the President of France wrong. They didn't use her married name. They only used her maiden name. She uses her married name. Also, the date they put on it was 29/17.
Wow. So after getting questioned, I think the query from Newsweek was, could there be any other explanation for this other than homophobia? Which is great, right? And
well, maybe they thought he was just there to escort the women.
12 hours later, they put his name up there.
Yeah. Also, there was you have another picture.
Picture of, well, that's with Emin Erdogan, who was not too happy. Erdogan, who was not too happy about being there with the guy.
Well, do we know that for sure?
We don't.
Or are we just making assumptions?
That's what we heard.
Look,
we're sure that her husband is an anti-gay bigot. How's that? And
had his thugs beat up protesters at the embassy in D.C.
There you are.
All right, so Trump...
Is it time for sermon?
It is.
Oh, good.
Well, first I have a more lighthearted suggestion. I want to speak to all the publishers out there.
Okay, please do.
And I want to suggest, and I'm guessing this may have crossed your mind, but on the off chance it hasn't, I want you to start getting those Brinks trucks rolled up to Trump Tower, a side entrance in New York. And I want you to offer Melania $500 million to walk away from that moron and tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
It's Macron versus moron.
Because Melania telling the truth about Trump would make, I would estimate, a minimum of $1 billion in book sales.
Would it make any difference? I mean, if she called him every name, they'd just say she's a dirty foreigner or something like that.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how much money those publishers would make.
Oh, she could make more money than she's going to make off the prenup with Donald.
That's why I'm suggesting these enormous sums, because I want her to have a real incentive, and I want to read the book.
We have all seen her brushing his hand away every time he tries to grab it in public.
Exactly. I mean, that's why I think she's ripe for this offer.
That is for real.
Well, then, you know, there were a couple of pictures toward the end of the trip where he was grabbing her hand and really forcing her to...
Does that to world leaders, too.
Yes. Well, clearly the news got to him, and so he made sure there were some pictures of him holding her hand. But she did avoid holding his hand and brush it away more than once. Now, seriously, rant part two. The violence, the Montana legislator who beat up the reporter, and the response, you know, I expected a right-wing response that exonerated him and would have said, oh, it's no big deal or whatever, or, you know, we really want a Republican in office. But no, what they said was, the reporter had it coming. I'm glad he beat him up. Not, well, we don't really believe in violence, but it's not that big a deal. It was, he did the right thing by beating this guy up.
And did you read about the Portland incident, of course? Wait a minute. In the Portland incident where the two guys came to the defense of the Muslim girls, people posted online, wow, what do they expect? They were sticking their noses in something they had no right to. They were threatening him. They were threatening him. This nutcase with a machete or whatever. How did he do this?
Knife.
Whatever.
Pulled out a knife. Yes, what they said was he acted in self-defense by killing those two guys and attacking a third.
Yes.
He, if they had left him alone, he would have just yelled at that Muslim girl and left.
That's
but
not
no.
true. He has expressed threatening behavior before.
He had a knife that he used.
Right.
He could easily have gone after her if they hadn't intervened.
Right.
And that's not the end of it. In Washington State, a guy came into a Native American event, encampment, campground of some sort, in his pickup truck and starts doing donuts and yelling racist slurs. And a couple of the Native Americans who were there try to rush the truck and say, stop, you know, cut it out, this is dangerous. He runs them over, killing one and sending the second to the hospital.
Well, to coin a phrase, the fish stinks from the head. And this is Trump. This is Trumpism. It's all been validated for people. Now they all feel so many people are walking around with, you know, if somebody's not speaking English in a store, they start yelling at them or threatening them or killing them. And that's what's happening these days.
Look,
and we've got to put the genie back in the bottle here.
I understand the anger. I believe of the right wing for the system.
All right, but
I believe the Democratic Party.
But it's being expressed against black people.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
I believe the Democratic Party has been delinquent in not addressing economic concerns more directly. I do. That's me.
I agree with you, absolutely. But it's anger mostly at people of color, gay people, Jews, women.
They are the scapegoats.
Because we're seen as the elite somehow, or who are unjustly benefiting from something that, you know, when we're the people on the bottom.
It's all crazy. I'm not arguing against that. I'm not saying this is rational. I'm saying that the Trump administration and Trump has a responsibility to intervene with this violence.
So
they're not.
So where is the anger at the budget, which tells every single one of them, you're not getting anything. You're getting 100% less. We're cutting your health care. We're cutting your veterans benefits. We're cutting your protections.
Look, I sit and listen to all this stuff about Russia and collusion and spying and all of that all day long. I want them to go after that. But we are so missing the boat in not going out there and eviscerating the budget and the health care plan and all of that. We have to be much louder about it.
We do it on this show every week.
Well, we are a tiny little raindrop in
well, no,
the,
they certainly
in the
talk
lake
about it.
of life here.
The big news this week on the healthcare thing was the CBO report and how it's going to cut, how many people it's going to cut off things, and the fact that the Republicans can't get enough votes for what they want to do.
It is not changing the minds of the people who are Trump supporters. He goes to Europe and is a bully and a bore, and his ratings go up. His ratings go up.
No, you've said certainly he has not lost his supporters.
Well,
I understand
that's the point. I'm saying.
And I would say that again. I've said this since the election. Our job is to engage the people who did not vote, not to try to change Trump voters.
I'm with that.
Engage people and give them something. Matt Taibbi wrote a brilliant column about this week, saying Democrats have got to come up with a much stronger message.
That is my point.
And it can't just be anti-Trump.
No, but it has to explain. It has to explain what's wrong specifically with Trump's policies and offer better alternatives.
As my old boss Bill Lynch would say, now you're being rational. I mean, he's making emotional appeals to racism and to hatred of women.
Yes.
Emotional, and what's so depressing to us is that it's so resonant with so many people, and that it's not repellent to enough people.
I couldn't agree more.
All
but
right.
let's get programmatic.
Let's get back to policy then.
Let's do sports.
Let's finish up on Trump. I mean, what they're doing about birth control is trying to cut coverage for birth control in health insurance plans from the Affordable Care Act under their interim final rule. I mean, what do they want everybody to be barefoot and pregnant in this country? The women? I mean, come on.
Yes, they do. I think they want, they see women as a threat.
Okay.
The men, those Trump men do.
All right, so let's go to sports.
Well, we'll do a gentle segue of discrimination into lighter sports stories, starting in North Carolina, where the National Basketball Association has announced it will take the All-Star Game back to Charlotte, North Carolina in 2019, in spite of the remaining discriminatory laws there. They
outrageous.
Are using the slight adjustment as a cover to go back into the state.
I guess they're not really our friends, are they?
In Florida, the World OutGames, a quadrennial event, were canceled at the last minute in Miami as athletes and other participants had arrived for the start of the games from all over the world. 2,000
registered athletes, 3,500 participants. Fraud is suspected.
Some events are going on because some sports are just holding their annual championships there. And they had a conference on human rights that went on. But basically, this is a huge fraud. They couldn't even tell people a week early, so they might have canceled their travel plans. The World OutGames was created as an alternative to the Gay Games some years ago and was always shaky. And the Gay Games, I was on the board of the New York Gay Games in 1994. The Gay Games have their own issues and, a little shakiness financially, but there's not fraud involved in the Gay Games, and they have a much better and longer history. And we'll go back to having just the Gay Games, but the World OutGames were a failed experiment.
If you are going to steal, you do wait to the last minute and run with the money.
Evidently.
All right. We got a better story from the U.S. national soccer teams. We're going to put this graphic,
men's team and women's team.
They are going to wear LGBT-themed jerseys to celebrate Pride. The men's will debut the look for the World Cup qualifying tune-up against Venezuela on June 3rd, and the women will wear them against Sweden on June 8th and Norway 3 days later, if you're looking for them.
I think it's a very nice gesture.
Very, very nice.
In Massachusetts, Nick Nasser, who is the captain of the Tufts University rugby team, came out in a story on outsports.com. It's a very lovely, sweet story. Congratulations to Nick. And I think that's the end of my sports stories. Sure.
Texas. So the houses of the Texas legislature could not get together on how bad they wanted their anti-LGBT bills to be. The House was a little more liberal than the Senate, a little bit, tiny bit. A lot of business interests coming out and saying, don't do this. And so they pulled back a little bit. But this has upset the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who is a leading anti-gay bigot in this country. And he wants Governor Greg Abbott to call a special session of the legislature just to hurt LGBT people. And it is, as we sit here, it is up in the air as to whether that will happen. Texas legislature only meets once every 2 years.
Because I'm sure Molly Ivins had things to say about that to minimize the danger of what they accomplished.
Neither man, dog, nor whatever is safe while the Texas legislature is in session.
There's also a terrible story out of Houston of a gay male couple murder-suicide. One of them was missing for several days. His friends went looking for him and found him at home murdered, and then found his relatively new lover, who they had thought was a little off-kilter, evidently as suicide. So the idea is that he killed him.
Another positive development in the courts, I think it's positive, that the Second Circuit, where we live, the Court of Appeals in New York, is agreeing to hear a sexual orientation discrimination case en banc, all the members of the federal panel, because their precedent in this district is that no, what is it, Title VII does not cover sexual orientation, but that's an old decision.
It's an old interpretation of sex discrimination as not including sexual orientation.
The Seventh Circuit, where we talked about the Ash Whitaker case, has already said that it does. And
yeah, that was a great case we told you about a few weeks ago, a breakthrough case.
So now there's a chance to get this in our area. Now, of course, the Supreme Court may never even have to hear this if all the circuits can agree on this. If there's a disagreement, then it would go to the Supreme Court. And again, you want to get it there before we lose our 5-4 majority.
Yeah, so this is a case of a skydiver who was fired because he's gay. And so he sued and said this was sex discrimination, and was rejected by the lower courts. But now the full, what is it? It's usually like 20-some judges.
It was like 11 or something, but anyway, whatever. Anyway, but I hope that comes out for us, because, we could even talk about it, the fact that the Equality Act only has 262 congressional sponsors out of 650, what do we have,
435 members.
500, yeah, but 535 members of Congress,
Senate.
right, 535 total, right?
Well,
in
if
Congress.
they don't vote together, you have the Senate and the House.
But HRC keeps saying we have 262 members of Congress.
Which are some from the Senate and some from the House. I see.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, well, you can't count those together. But we are adding Republican sponsors here and there, and that is both surprising and heartwarming
Scott
and
Taylor
encouraging.
From Virginia. Scott Taylor from Virginia endorsed the act.
Also, a few other heartwarming stories. In Nevada, the Governor Sandoval, has signed a bill that will update the state's marriage and parenting laws to acknowledge same-sex marriage. Now, same-sex marriage is legal nationally, but there are archaic laws on the books in many states, and which basically should be ignored because we now have same-sex marriage. But if you don't wipe them out, that can start causing problems, and the right wing comes in and tries to uphold the state laws and start challenging the federal situation.
Well,
So updating the state laws is a good thing to do.
Mississippi didn't vote to let women vote until a few years ago.
Also, if they do change the Supreme Court and wipe out the marriage decision, to have state by state updating their laws would be a good thing.
Especially since what's on the books is that it's forbidden in our state.
And something of a surprise in Louisiana, we told you the legislature there has been arguing over a new law on domestic violence, and that the right wing did not want to include same-sex couples under the provisions of this law. And we thought we were sort of dead in the water on that.
It was a close vote.
They came up, well, they switched the vote. And now they've passed a law that does include same-sex couples. And you know how they did it?
No, I do not. That's why I watch this show.
They deleted references to spouses. They just have partners, because the Christian right did not want them to pass a law that acknowledged same-sex spouses.
So this allows it.
Yes.
And Rhode Island has, the House unanimously passed a bill against conversion therapy. If you unanimously passed it, what were you waiting for?
Well, it hadn't occurred to them.
And here's my Alabama story. This is Samford University, which is a Baptist college down there, and the faculty and students have approved a group to discuss sexual orientation issues. It's not an LGBT club per se, but they're basically saying, the president of the university said, look, we're going to lose these young people from the church if we don't make a little progress on how we handle this kind of stuff, because
it's a very enlightened attitude.
So, so it's not an LGBT club per se.
It's a study group.
It's a place where you can come and talk about these issues. Currently, if you have sex on campus,
that's what those groups are.
If you have sex on the campus of Samford University, either heterosexual or homosexual outside of marriage, although I don't know if it's approved inside of marriage for homosexuals, you are indefinitely on probation and a $500 fine, which helps the motel business off campus there.
At a lot of these Christian schools, you are expelled if you have sex outside of marriage.
Well.
And congratulations to former Vice President Joe Biden, who has, for at least the second time, officiated at a same-sex marriage. The guy on the left, I think it's him, is a Democratic National Committee finance official.
Marrying Kyle Ferrari there.
Yeah. And sad news from Brooklyn, New York, where Antoine Thomas, 27 years old, violently beat a lesbian couple on a subway train, causing a concussion, a broken eye socket, and various cuts while ranting against the lesbian couple. Go ahead.
United Airlines is apologizing again for abusing a passenger.
Yeah, I know.
Well, I mean, this gay dad, Henry Amador Batten, who writes a blog about gay dads, was flying from North Carolina, to his North Carolina home, and he had his little son, on his lap, and he just put his arms to. Kid was upset. He put his hands around the kid, so his own hands were in the kid's lap. And the flight attendants accused him of molesting the child and called in authorities. And he raised holy hell about this, and was eventually they had authority. He was being put through the ringer, and they apologized, and after and that is supposed to be that, but.
Okay, grab a pen and a piece of paper. We have a number of events to tell you about around the country that are coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
First, this weekend on June 4th, which is Sunday, I believe.
Yes.
Queen's Pride here in New York, the Queen's Pride March and Festival.
And there is going to be an exhibit out in Queens starting on June 9th through the 30th at the Queens Museum, Lavender Line Coming Out in Queens, in honor of the 25th anniversary of the Queen's Pride March.
Well, in a couple of years or a few years, we'll be celebrating
50.
the 50th Stonewall. In San Francisco on July 8th. June 8th, a memorial to Gilbert Baker at the Castro Theater.
Do some Googling around this, because apparently it's free, but you need some tickets to go to it. So there's an Eventbrite thing on this Gilbert Baker Memorial in San Francisco at the Castro Theater. Just Google it if you want to go.
On June 11th, next Sunday, several events. In Long Beach, New York, they're having their Pride March and Festival. And the Grand Marshals will be Councilmember Danny Drum of New York City, basketball legend Sue Wicks, and the late Gilbert Baker has been named as a Grand Marshal in memoriam of the Long Beach, New York Pride Parade.
And we're going to have our own memorial and march to Gilbert Baker here in New York on June 14th, Flag Day, his favorite day, starting at 6 o'clock at the Stonewall. And we're going to be marching over to the Hudson River Park.
On back to June 11th, a week from Sunday, in LA, they're having their Pride March, and it's going to be an all-resistance march, political Pride March, which is terrific.
And then on June 12th...
and in D.C.
Oh, right, we're having the big march there.
D.C., the National Equality March. Yes, June 12th, we'll see many events around the country marking the one-year anniversary of the massacre at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando. Here in New York on June 12th, it'll be outside the Stonewall Inn from 7 to 9 p.m.
Organized by Gays Against Guns, yes?
Yep. And a little further down the road, on June 24th, the St. Petersburg, Florida Pride Parade will start with a preceding event of Trans Pride, which may be one of the first formal events like that. And the next day here in New York on June 25th, the Pride March will have a big resistance contingent at the beginning of the parade. We wanted them to turn the whole parade into a resistance march. But they're resisting.
Well, plus, they're now requiring contingents to have insurance.
Crazy.
And
you can't walk down the street.
The little groups are saying, we can't afford, in some cases, $850 for an insurance policy. I mean, the big groups have policies covering them already, so they're not even affected.
No.
It's
terrible.
It is outrageous.
It is
to march,
completely
participate
outrageous.
in a march.
Heritage of Pride, will you please get your act together and stop this kind of nonsense? People just want to walk down the street.
Yeah.
They can take responsibility for themselves. They've done it for almost 50 years.
They're afraid of terrorism.
For hundreds of years.
They're afraid of terrorism. I mean, if you want people to sign a waiver that says, if there's a terrorist attack, I ain't going to blame you.
Honest
How's
to
that?
God. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
All right, shall we go talk?
International news.
Yes.
Let's hopscotch
let's
the
start
globe.
with Macron versus Putin, because the new French president took him on Syria, on human rights, and on Chechnya, which is a human rights issue, Chechnya. And Putin was kind of like a little stunned by this and said, "Well, we're looking into it." You know, he didn't just dismiss it.
Well, he didn't freak out. He had a smooth answer, but
so
it's nice to have him publicly challenged.
Because our president and our Secretary of State don't raise these issues.
No, in fact, they're quite overt about it. We don't raise human rights issues. That's why we go to Saudi Arabia and don't confront them on their lack of democracy, while we condemn Iran, which just had a democratic election.
Meanwhile, a close ally of Putin, the Patriarch Kirill, who was the Russian Orthodox leader, has compared marriage equality to the Nazi-era laws. Now, I read something interesting this week, that Hitler actually modeled a lot of his segregation laws and everything on segregation laws in the South.
Wouldn't be surprised.
Contemporary in the United States. He thought he was going to get away with it because they do this in the United States to black people.
Macron, by the way, has taken a couple of Chechnyan gay refugees into France. We told you last week Lithuania had taken a couple. They're starting to do this, which is a terrific thing. And
Human Rights Watch has written a report saying this is all happening. We've documented it.
Confirming the roundup, the torture, and says this is an attempt to purge gay men by government officials. This is not some rogue group. This is the government of Chechnya trying to purge gay men.
And the opposition leader in Israel, the leader of the Labor Party, Isaac Herzog, raised this with the chief of staff to the Chechen president, saying it's horrifying.
And all of this is taking place in a very homophobic atmosphere in Russia that we've talked about for years with Putin. I mean, when you criticize Putin about this, all you're doing is confirming, you know, what he's been doing for years. And there's just an ancillary story of a chain grocery store owner in Moscow who hung a sign on the front window of his store saying, "No entry for faggots." He's not being prosecuted.
Right. Okay.
All right, let's hopscotch a few others. Oh, the tragedy in Manchester, England, the terrorist bomb there. Took, among others, the life of a gay blogger who is quite well known. The guy on the left there, Martin Hett. That's him with his mother, actually. He was well known for helping her knitting career. He was 29 years old and part of the tragedy there.
So in Taiwan, it looks like the government is moving on this constitutional decision that says they got to do same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
First of all, the opposition leader who was against same-sex marriage,
He switched his position.
right. And he had once called it horrible and creepy. Now
We
he
have a
doesn't-
little video of the celebration that took place when the decision was announced. That was nice, that people were sitting around outside waiting for that and cheering when the decision was announced.
And the president of Taiwan is now saying the law's got to guarantee freedom of marriage and equal rights for all people. So they're not like saying we're going to do domestic partnerships or try to get around this. And he says he wants to move expeditiously on it.
Of course, China told its news media, "Don't make a big deal of this. We don't want to excite the masses in China."
But Hong Kong is already saying we want to do this too.
Yeah. And in Thailand, they've been inspired by this, and the government is promising action on both partnership rights and civil rights for LGBT people. Although the organizers of the third Gay and Lesbian Film Festival there in Bangkok have canceled it because they said the government was imposing too much censorship and interference.
Even the Church of Scotland is ready for same-sex marriages in the church. And what they're saying is, there's division, and there's people who don't want to do it, and usually they kind of, allow them to
local option.
Local option. But somebody said, if you want to move up in the church these days, you got to be for this. So, well, let's get with the program.
Well, those churches, they're pretty gay.
Well, and also the Finnish Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church is also moving on this. So,
yeah, but Pastor Margaret Court in Australia is not moving on this. The former tennis star, for whom Margaret Court Arena is named at the big stadium there where they play the Australian Open.
Not if Martina Navratilova has anything to do with it. She wants it taken down.
I don't know how I feel about that, but Margaret Court she said this for years, and she's said it again. You can watch it online on YouTube or whatever. I have nothing against gay people, but the Bible says that marriage is for one man and one woman, and we are going against God if we approve anything else. But activists in Australia are pointing out that government backbenchers in Parliament, who in general are required to go along with whatever the government wants, have proposed a bill on something else where they are opposing the government position. So now LGBT activists are saying to them, hey, you're willing to go against the government on this. Now you should propose a marriage bill against the government position, and let's get it passed in Parliament.
All Margaret Court wants is for young people to know what God wants in terms of marriage, and they wouldn't know that if the government allows same-sex marriage.
Well, Ben & Jerry's Australia says that in its stores, it will no longer allow people to order ice cream cones, 2-scoop cones with the same ice cream in both scoops, as long as same-sex marriage is not approved in Australia. You cannot order same ice cream cones at Ben & Jerry's in Australia. That's all right. I like mixing chocolate and mint chocolate chip.
Okay.
Delicious.
As we sit here, at least San Francisco is having a rally for the Indonesians who are being persecuted by the what's going on over there, where they rounded up. They're rounding up people everywhere at this point. It's not just in the most conservative provinces.
They have put together a new anti-LGBT police task force in West Java, which is not in the Aceh province that is operating under Sharia law.
They will not be accepted in society, the police chief says.
And in Hungary, the prime minister there welcomed with open arms Brian Brown, head of the International Organization Against Marriage, or for Marriage, or whatever he calls it, bringing thousands of people to the World Congress of Families in Hungary. This is reprehensible. And in Bermuda, as we expected, thousands of people were turned out by the right wing to protest the recent pro-marriage ruling by the court.
We had a little counter-protest, but not me, but theirs was much bigger.
Our side.
Theirs was much bigger.
Well, that's always true, isn't it?
No, not on marriage, I wouldn't think, in New York.
Ruben Diaz in the Bronx.
Marching hand in hand with Brian Brown
Yes,
when he was here in New York. Which is why our council member Corey Johnson, we're waiting for you to not to say that what you think about Ruben Diaz, who's running for city council.
In our media,
please call me back.
LGBT activists put up some pro-gay posters on the street, and the government ripped them right down. There were just a few, be kind to gay people posters. And in China, we told you last week about the Shanghai Mothers Market, where very brave mothers came out to be part of a market where moms offer their kids for marriage in a good way.
All right.
Just advertise their kids' availability. So some of these mothers came out and said, hey, we have gay kids, and they would like to find partners too.
They brought rainbow umbrellas.
Yeah, well, they got hauled away. It turns out that a dating and information app for lesbians called Rella was one of the sponsors of these mothers who came out for their gay kids. And their app has now been shut down after they sponsored this event. They had 5 million users, and the government has shut down their app. Meanwhile, a big gaming company in China has now bought 100% of Grindr. What's going to happen to Grindr?
Well, look, I mean, Mark Siegel, the gay journalist from Philadelphia, went to Cuba, and he said, half the internet is closed down there. Basically,
well, they don't have an infrastructure for the internet.
He means you can't get on. You can't.
Well, you can't get on the internet. Period.
Okay.
And in Israel, 4 filmmakers are now boycotting the Tel Aviv Film Festival. Their films are showing, I think, but they're not showing up because they're protesting the government's putting on an LGBT film festival as pinkwashing the sins of the Israeli government.
And when I mentioned that the Labor Party leader there is criticizing Chechnya, it's not as if I'm unconscious of the fact that of what Israel is doing to Palestine.
And we thought you might want to take a look at this new television ad by Iceland Air, where they feature a gay male couple.
Now you can combine Saga points and money as a payment for all flights. Your adventure is waiting. The point is getting you there. Iceland Air.
That's what we want to see from United.
And everybody else. The Margaret Court thing came up because she said she wouldn't fly Qantas anymore because they have a gay CEO who was supporting marriage, and so she's going to avoid Qantas. And I thought, every other airline in the world supports LGBT people. What airline is she going to fly? She's going to be on a raft.
Well, or an ark.
Yeah. HIV and AIDS news. A viewer pointed out to me that we, rather than saying AIDS news, should probably say HIV and AIDS news, and other medical news.
And health news, yes.
Yeah.
And, the big news, that film we showed you a clip of the trailer of last week, 120 beats a minute, about ACT UP Paris, a dramatic film, made by an ACT UP member, has won the Grand Prix, which is the second prize at the Cannes Film Festival. That's terrific.
That is really terrific. Congratulations.
I want to see it.
And I got a note that the Columbia University Doctors Primary Care Nurse Practitioner Group Clinic Uptown is newly offering specific LGBT services, the first in Upper Manhattan at 168th Street. trans health, HIV, PrEP and PEP, testing and care, mental and primary health. So check that out if you're uptown.
And the Times did a story about doctors being encouraged to ask their patients about sexual orientation, and again,
and gender identity.
Not having gotten the memo from the Trump administration, the Veterans Health Administration, it does say, and what we've always said, the way you do this is when you do an intake, you just ask it among many other questions. Everybody should be asking these questions. You don't draw attention to it, not by the way, are you gay?
It was very, very discouraging to read that doctors are scared to ask people their sexual orientation for fear of offending them. Come on, it's 2017 and you're a doctor.
And this is about people's health.
Honest to God, very discouraging. All right, entertainment news.
People don't have to answer if they don't want to.
Yeah, figure out a cool way to ask. GLAAD has put out its new annual survey. They looked at 125 major movies in 2016. 23 of 125 included LGBT characters, and half of them were just for a minute, and some just as a lazy punchline, and 8 of them were non-human.
So why was not? That doesn't sound like a lot to celebrate.
Au contraire, it is a lot to be discouraged about.
Right. I told you that the production of Tony Kushner's Angels in America in London has gotten rave reviews, and it's at the National Theatre there with Nathan Lane as Roy Cohn and Andrew Garfield as Prior Walter. It seems like it's Broadway bound, but it could even be later this summer, like coming from London and coming right over here. But you can see it in cinemas across the country. Go to ntlive.com, and find out if it's playing in a cinema near you, along with a lot of other National Theatre productions.
Yeah, but if you'd like to see a different version, the City Opera in New York is reviving the opera version of Angels in America, which is going to play at Jazz at Lincoln Center starting June 10th for several days. So you can check out that version. They're also going to do a version of Brokeback Mountain, a Brokeback Mountain opera next year in 2018.
And that's been around for a while, too.
Maybe.
Yes.
Yes, I think elsewhere. I'm not sure whether it's played in New York.
Right.
I have a list of some movies that are going to be made available on DVD and video on demand at the end of this week. The Freedom to Marry, the Evan Wolfson mostly, and some Mary Bonato tracking of the Supreme Court case, the whole stretch of working for marriage legalization.
Behind the scenes.
Yes, The Freedom to Marry. And Political Animals, which is a terrific documentary about 4 lesbian politicians in California, Carol Migden, Sheila Kuehl, Jackie Goldberg, and Christine Keogh. I love that movie. Political Animals, available on DVD and video on demand. And a sort of young lesbian love story called Heartland. I wasn't as thrilled about that, but it's okay.
If only lesbians ruled the world.
Well, some would say they do in one way or another. And speaking of which, Ellen DeGeneres is going back to stand-up. She's doing a special for Netflix, her first in almost 15 years.
Well, she does a little stand-up every day. Gives it away on TV.
And there's another lesbian movie opening in L.A. on June 9th. As Good as You won Best LGBT at the Hollywood Real Independent Film Festival.
Does that have anything to do with Jeremy Hooper?
No. It's about a young lesbian widow. Actually, the other young lesbian movie is also a widow's movie, and they're both sort of sitcoms, but they're about grief and mourning and regeneration and all that kind of stuff.
We're part of life now.
Let me write that down.
That's the goal. Thank you for being with us, and we'll be back next week. Happy Pride Month, I guess I should say, because here it is, June.
Yeah. So we'll put all those events up on our website at gayusatv.org.
If you go to our website, you can sign up for our email list, and I give you more detailed links to these things.
And you can even watch the show there.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. We'll be back next week.
And listen to our podcast. Right, Bill? Yes,
it's
indeed.
It's the show in audio.
Yes.